I recently sat down for coffee with a friend of mine, a woman who's spent decades in the high-stakes world of healthcare. She's a registered nurse with a PhD, the kind of person who oversees university compliance and manages complex systems for a living. If anyone should have the American dream of retirement figured out, it's her. We were discussing her plans for when she turned 65, and she was glowing, practically radiating relief that the finish line was finally in sight. But then I happened to mention the monthly premiums for Medicare supplemental and prescription plans. The expression on her face shifted instantly. It wasn't just surprise, it was a look of genuine, bone-deep shock. This woman, with all her degrees and clinical expertise, had spent years under the impression that Medicare was a free gift from the government. She was standing on the edge of a massive financial commitment she hadn't budgeted for, simply because she hadn't known which questions to ask. It's a scene that plays out in living rooms across the country every single day. I've watched a man come home from work and drop a stack of new healthcare paperwork on the kitchen table like it was a live grenade, asking his wife to tell him what it means, because the jargon was too tedious to even attempt. He was essentially betting his family's future on a signature and a prayer, hoping that if he ever ended up in a hospital bed, the fine print wouldn't be the thing that bankrupts him. What's truly unsettling isn't just a lack of information, it's the contradiction. We've reached a point where someone can be morally outraged by Obamacare, vehemently expressing their mistrust of the system, while simultaneously being enrolled in the Affordable Care Act. They are railing against the very lifeline they are holding. This level of confusion isn't an accident. We are drowning in a system that has been made deliberately exhaustively complex. The goal isn't for you to understand. The goal is for you to get tired. The corporate powers behind the throne want you to feel so overwhelmed by the fine print that you eventually just pick up the pen and sign on the dotted line. Because in modern America, what you don't know won't just hurt you. It's exactly what they're banking on. Okay, so let's unpack this. We're definitely moving far beyond just, basic frustration here.
Right.
What we've gathered takes that moment of personal shock, the nurse you mentioned, the man dropping that paperwork on the table like a live grenade, and it connects it to a much, much darker thesis. And we have to ask, is this complexity, this overwhelming maze of fine print, is it really a form of weaponization? Or is it just, bureaucratic incompetence run amok?
Well, what's so fascinating is that the argument here is that it's not incompetence, it's engineering.
Engineering.
Yeah, that feeling of exhaustion you described, that bone-deep shock, that weariness that just makes you give up, that feeling is in itself a key output of the system.
So the exhaustion is the point.
The exhaustion is the point. It's a kind of political entropy that's designed to diminish your will. So in this deep dive, we're going to explore how that administrative complexity is strategically weaponized to really dismantle individual agency and what's called the meritocratic promise.
Yeah.
And crucially, we're going to trace that line of exhaustion from these tiny micro-level compliance issues all the way up to these huge macro-level philosophical goals. We're going to ask how modern society ended up, prioritizing immediate satisfaction over actual human health.
And how that leaves us, defenseless.
Exactly. Yeah. Why that resulting isolation leaves you, the individual, completely defenseless against these massive institutions.
So when we talk about that stack of incomprehensible paperwork, whether it's for healthcare or taxes or government benefits, we're really talking about something called administrative burden. And before we jump to the idea that this is all some grand conspiracy, we really need to define the friction points. And the material gives us a formal framework for this. It categorizes this friction not just as an annoyance, but as three distinct compounding costs.
And that structure is so essential because it lets us actually quantify the damage. We tend to focus on the obvious stuff, the time it takes. But the real burden hits you on three different levels, and they're all interconnected.
Okay, so what's the first one?
So the first category, and it's often the steepest hurdle to get over, is the learning cost.
Learning cost.
It's the sheer intellectual effort that's required just to find the rules or the eligibility criteria or to even understand the jargon. You basically have to become a temporary, unpaid expert in a field you never chose to study.
Like your friend, the nurse with a PhD.
Exactly. A registered nurse with a PhD, decades in the field, and she was still genuinely shocked to find out that Medicare supplemental and prescription plans were not free. That's a devastating learning cost.
Yeah?
If her institutional expertise wasn't enough to prevent that kind of financial shock, what hope does the average person have? The knowledge isn't transparent, it's buried.
And then once you've spent all that time and you finally manage to understand the rules, or you think you have, then you hit the second wall, which is just the The sheer physical exhaustion of it all.
That's the compliance cost.
Right.
This is the time, the money, the actual physical effort you spend fulfilling the requirements once you finally know what they are. It means filling out complex, often repetitive forms.
The worst.
Gathering documents that might require multiple trips to government offices, waiting in endless phone queues, navigating those awful automated phone trees. It's that energy drain that leads to burnout. You're using valuable time off work or spending money on childcare just to submit an application.
And I would argue that even if you somehow manage to conquer the learning costs and the compliance costs, the third one's the real killer because it's all internal.
Absolutely. The third category, and it's the one identified as the most insidious, is the psychological cost. This is the stress. It's the feelings of uncertainty, the anxiety, the stigma that's sometimes associated with seeking benefits or just dealing with bureaucracy. It's that constant fear that if you make one tiny clerical mistake, it's going to result in huge financial penalties, or even worse, you lose essential support.
It's that man you mentioned, just signing the paperwork and hoping.
Yeah. Exactly. Hoping that if he ever ended up in a hospital bed, the fine print wouldn't be the thing that bankrupts him. That surrender of your own agency, that feeling that you're just gambling with your future, that is a direct psychological toll.
And, when we look at the government systems themselves, you can actually see the difference these burdens make on an institutional level.
You can, and it really helps illustrate the argument that simplicity is a choice. It's not an accident.
How so?
Well, take Social Security. It manages to keep its administrative costs below 1% of its total budget.
1%. That's incredibly low.
It is. And why? Because the procedures for figuring out eligibility and benefit size are highly automated. They're transparent and streamlined. The burden is on the system, not on you.
Okay, so contrast that with something else.
Contrast that with, say, SNMP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Its administrative costs can run 10 times higher. We're talking 10% or more.
10 times. Wow.
And that high cost is directly linked to the complexity of the delivery and the exponentially higher administrative burden placed on the applicant. We are literally spending 10 times the administrative effort just to feed people.
Yeah.
It's almost as if the bureaucracy is actively trying to prove the cynics right.
Yeah.
When systems automate and reduce the hurdles for the individual, costs plummet. When they introduce complexity, costs, both to the state and to you, they just skyrocket.
So we've established that these administrative burdens are expensive and they're exhausting. But what does this really mean for the idea of a fair society? The argument here is a powerful one, that these burdens aren't just annoying friction points. They actively reinforce inequality through three critical mechanisms.
Right. And this is where we shift from just describing an inconvenience to actually diagnosing a structural bias.
Okay.
First, these burdens fundamentally undermine the whole purpose of equality. Many programs are designed to provide a baseline of support for people in poverty, right? They're aiming for some measure of economic or social equality.
Sure, that's the goal.
But if the administrative hurdle prevents, say, a third of the eligible people from even applying, then the policy has failed. The burden becomes a kind of unauthorized gatekeeper, and it prevents the intended social outcome from ever happening, no matter how well-funded the program is.
And it's not just that they undermine equality in a general sense, but the burdens themselves. They seem to be strategically aimed.
That's the second mechanism, targeted burdens. The system uses complexity to differentiate between who gets what and how easily. We see this so vividly in our tax system.
How so?
For people who are financially well off, benefits like employer-provided health insurance or home ownership deductions, they're often integrated simply and accessibly right into the tax code. They require almost no extra administrative effort. They're frictionless.
Okay.
But then you consider benefits designed for the working poor, like the Earned Income Tax Credit, the EITC. Those programs are required to face way higher layers of burdens. We're talking complex documentation and, crucially, much higher audit rates.
So who you are determines how complex the system is for you.
Precisely. It suggests that the system is structurally designed to make it easy for one group to claim benefits and intentionally very, very difficult for another.
And this brings us to what feels like the fundamental cruelty of it all, the administrative burden catch-22. The people who are financially or physically stressed are the exact people who have the least capacity to deal with this hassle, but they're the ones subjected to the most intense scrutiny.
It's a vicious cycle. The resources you need to navigate complexity, things like education, a flexible work schedule, spare time, high cognitive capacity, those are often scarce among populations who are already experiencing poverty or ill health.
Right.
Behavioral science confirms it. When you're experiencing scarcity, whether it's time or money, you're just less able to manage all these external hassles. So the sick, the low income, those with mental health problems, they need the benefits the most, but they face the greatest barriers to getting them.
The burden is exclusionary.
By design, or at least by outcome.
Yeah. And we see this mechanism just actively dismantling what we often call the meritocratic promise. There's this account of Arthur, a 68-year-old former foreman from a steel mill in Pennsylvania. It's so compelling. I mean, this is a man who built a lifetime of success through diligence and mastery of heavy industry. He was the definition of a blue-collar success story.
He was, and yet when he got to retirement, his 4 decades of hard-won expertise meant absolutely nothing. Nothing in the face of a 30-page Medicare Advantage enrollment packet. He was completely paralyzed, faced with this incomprehensible jargon like actuarial equivalence and discretionary coordination of benefits.
Yeah.
His struggle was a direct confrontation with this administrative dark matter that just negated his entire life's achievements.
He wasn't lacking intelligence, right? He was facing a language that was specifically engineered to be impenetrable.
Exactly. And the intended outcome of that sheer paralyzing exhaustion was submission. That's the key. He eventually just signed where the X was marked, simply surrendering his healthcare autonomy to a system he no longer understood.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. His story is a heartbreaking illustration of how the weaponization of complexity functions to dismantle your agency. It makes a lifetime of hard work yield only mandatory fine print navigation, and in the end, this defeated acceptance of a system that treats you like a managed data point, not a respected citizen.
So the natural question is, if these burdens are so clearly damaging and costly, why don't we just get rid of them? I mean, why do we tolerate this expense and this human suffering?
It's a great question, and the answer suggested is a genuinely cynical one.
Which is?
That burdens often function as a form of policy-making by other means.
Policy-making by other means. What does that mean?
And it means they achieve political outcomes like restricting access to benefits or voter participation without having to pass an explicit, inspectable law. The more complex and submerged the implementation details are, the less they're subject to public scrutiny.
So it's governance by friction.
Governance by friction. Perfect. You don't need to pass a controversial bill to cut a program or target a population. You just need to quietly increase the documentation requirements, mandate more in-person interviews, or introduce confusing deadlines until the program's take-up rate just drops.
And because it's administrative, not legislative, it just flies under the radar.
Completely. And a primary source of this opacity and friction is the federated and fragmented nature of U.S. policy implementation. The more players involved, states, counties, municipalities, the more veto points and opportunities there are to inject complexity. Every additional layer is an opportunity for a political or ideological preference to translate into an administrative hurdle without ever having to draw public attention to the act itself.
That sounds incredibly inefficient. I mean, shouldn't centralized, streamlined administration always be preferred just for the cost savings?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? Ideally, yes. But political interests often override efficiency, and we have the data to prove how inefficient it is. When we look at the administration of SNP, county-level administration results in costs that are 24% higher than programs run at the state level.
24% higher.
Yep. And this fragmentation is directly linked to higher burdens for the applicant and, predictably lower take-up rates. This confirms that complexity isn't just an accident of growth, it's often the direct result of decentralized governance that lacks a unified vision or, frankly, ethical leadership.
But the COVID-19 pandemic, it inadvertently gave us this massive real-world experiment in burden reduction, didn't it? When the crisis hit, the goal instantly shifted from controlling access to just getting money out the door as fast as possible.
That's right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the data suggests some really profound solutions when the political will is there. The crisis forced a massive temporary shift toward simplicity. For instance, temporary measures like waiving in-person interviews for programs like WIC and SNP immediately led to fewer people being kicked off the programs. But more significantly, the government used the most streamlined, least burdensome system it has, the federal tax system, to deliver benefits like stimulus payments and the expanded child tax credit.
Which instantly removed the need for separate applications, confusing documents, and eligibility reviews for millions of people.
Exactly. And this simplified process led to a dramatic and rapid decline in poverty because the administrative burdens were just gone for millions of people. It's empirical proof that policy designers can and should shift the burden onto the state's automated systems rather than onto the individual.
The result is simpler, faster, and cheaper delivery of essential support.
It proves that complexity is a choice, not a necessity.
Okay, so we've established that this administrative complexity is a weapon designed to exhaust us. Now, let's talk about the spiritual and political fallout from that exhaustion, because the journey from bureaucratic confusion to a full-blown philosophical crisis is incredibly short.
It really is.
If the rules of the game are unknowable and the system is designed to break your spirit, well, the only rational response is to check out. The argument is that this pervasive systemic distrust pushes rational citizens into a state of political or internal exile. It defines the modern political environment by a deep nihilism.
And this isn't the lazy nihilism of just, apathy. This is an active, principled refusal to engage. It's described as this twisted pair of responses: detachment and absolutism.
Detachment and absolutism. Let's start with detachment.
Detachment is the withdrawal. It's the resignation from every form of power or ambition for power under the current system. It means becoming a virtual expatriate.
Sure.
You respect the power the state holds, but you refuse to fight it or participate in its structures.
So you operate with the caution of a fox and an owl.
Exactly. You prioritize knowing the system over being seen by it. You want to be noticed only when you need to be, but never feared. The belief is it's better to manage your own small realm than to participate in a large, corrupted one.
So detachment is the survival mechanism against the sheer psychological cost of this administrative state. You just stop engaging because engagement is too costly. What about the other side? Absolutism.
Absolutism is the intellectual response. It means thinking ex nihilo, starting from scratch, from first principles.
Why? Why from scratch?
Because the absolutist believes that much of the system's traditional or soft knowledge, our history, our political science, our established norms, is now corrupted by ogres. They see these figures whose errors aren't accidental mistakes, but intentional sins or crimes against reason or the public good.
That is a radical rejection of intellectual tradition. The idea that a traditional scholar stands on the shoulders of giants, but the absolutist realizes there are ogres in the crowd, so they have to climb back down to the ground and start intellectual life completely anew.
Precisely. It's a conscious rejection of the consensus. If you feel you can't trust the filtering mechanisms, the professors, the journalists, the established historians, then the only way you see to find truth is to reject a tradition and rebuild your political doctrine using pure logic. And this immense intellectual work, this search for first principles, it forces the discussion back to the most fundamental question of all. What is the actual, unadorned purpose of government?
And this philosophical excavation, it forces us to look critically at foundational maxims, like Lincoln's government of the people, by the people, and for the people. The argument is that we have to stop treating these three things as equally valuable, especially when they come into conflict. We have to clarify the distinction between government by the people and government for the people. What if you're forced to choose?
And the material posits that government for the people, the provision of essentials, ensuring the nation's welfare, its security, its true health, is a fundamental necessity. It's like having fresh, potable water. Government by the people, or popular sovereignty, is a luxury. It's like having cold water.
So we all want cold, fresh water.
Of course. A government that is both effective, so for the people, and democratic, by the people. But if you are marooned and forced to choose, necessity has to prevail. You have to secure the necessary good first.
That is a brutally utilitarian, almost instrumental view of power. It just strips away all the romantic notions of democracy.
It is, and it leads directly to what's called Pope's rule, which formally captures this perspective: whatever governs best is best.
Whatever governs best is best.
This rule rejects the mystical belief that any specific group, whether it's citizens of a democracy, an aristocracy, a monarchy, has an inherent moral right to political power, regardless of the good or evil that power does. The only question that matters is the practical good that's delivered.
So, if an autistic alien AI overlord made the most just laws and enforced them impartially,
Pope's rule would suggest that regime would be functionally the best.
yes. But wait a minute, doesn't that inherently endorse authoritarianism as long as it's ruthlessly efficient and just? How does this idea address the danger of sacrificing by the people for the people? I mean, we're a nation founded on popular sovereignty. If we give that up, aren't we giving up the whole framework?
That is the central tension this instrumental view accepts. It doesn't deny the value of popular sovereignty, but it demands that we treat it as an observation of practical utility and is, rather than an aristocratic aesthetic judgment, an ought.
I see.
The argument is that our belief in popular sovereignty is often treated as this moral absolute, which prevents us from asking if it's currently delivering the necessary goods. By denying anyone a born moral right to political power, the goal is to create a starting point for a rational design of governance that's focused purely on outcomes.
So it forces us to confront an uncomfortable fact.
That an ineffective, chaotic democracy that fails to deliver security or health may be morally superior in theory, but it's practically inferior to a stable, functional system.
Okay, so to achieve that rational government that is truly for the people, this instrumental perspective says we have to actively reject two dominant modern governing philosophies that have proven destructive.
Right. And the first one to be dismissed is Vox Populi, Vox Dei. The voice of the people is the voice of God. The argument is that this doctrine was effectively exploded in the 20th century.
How so?
We saw through totalitarian examples that even an educated population can be dangerously misled and persuaded to desire things that are fundamentally bad for them or for the state. The belief that the people's spontaneous will is inherently divine was just shattered.
So the system didn't just discard the concept, it subtly managed it.
Exactly. It was amended into this self-referential tautology. The people are always right, if rightly educated. And since control over the teachers, the journalists, the professors, the media, the institutions that filter information, since that control determines what the public knows and therefore what the public desires, the true sovereignty rests with whoever controls the hiring and the narratives for those jobs.
So this suggests that the formal sovereignty, the right to vote, it persists long after the real power has dissolved. The voter is no longer an energetic great beast of democracy, but a passively managed, soft sea cucumber.
And to empower that sea cucumber through elections is merely to empower its farmer, the oligarchy that controls the information stream. The argument is that the public mind has been transformed into little more than a megaphone of power.
Okay, so that's the first principle to reject. What's the second?
The second is arguably even more central to modern life, luxus populi, suprema lex, which translates as public luxury is the supreme law. This is the core foundation of modern utilitarianism, whether you see it in capitalism or communism. It equates maximizing public satisfaction, utility, pleasure, luxury with good governance.
Right, we're talking about a system driven by hedonomics. If the GDP is rising, if we have more goods, if we can consume more easily, then we must be doing well. It's just measuring aggregate satisfaction through consumption.
But the fundamental trouble with utilitarianism, as identified here, is not an economic failure, but a spiritual problem.
A spiritual problem.
Utility is the satisfaction of desire, but the pursuit of desire is a constant escalation, not a fulfillment. If you give a person everything they want, they simply want more, or they want something different. The Buddha taught that desire could never be satisfied by hedonics. It's only inflamed.
So optimizing government for the pursuit of utility doesn't satisfy human desire, it just escalates it.
It leads directly to societal diabetes.
Societal diabetes, that is a powerful analogy. We're optimizing for a metric maximum low-effort pleasure that inherently makes us spiritually sicker and more dependent on the next injection of convenience.
And technology is the ultimate accelerant. Advanced tech, which creates goods and services with minimal human effort, acts like a resource cursed like a nation that strikes oil but has no stability to manage the wealth. It creates a state of fully automated luxury communism that isn't evenly distributed.
It only benefits a louche, talented, largely parasitic elite.
Right, who profit from the frictionless system. But the real tragedy is the human destruction that's caused by convenience. When technology removes essential difficulty, the challenges of manual labor, the threat of danger, the need to struggle, it removes the very conditions that define a fulfilling human experience.
When sailors are replaced by robots or soldiers by drones,
it may be physical progress, but it's human destruction. It removes one more demanding, character-building way of being a human being.
And this critique leads us back to the historically enduring principle we're meant to recover, salus populi, suprema lexus. The health or the human condition of the people is the supreme law. This principle demands that the government must actively defend and cultivate not just the physical bodies, but the souls of its subjects. And that qualitative goal is it's resistant to the purely quantitative mass administration tools in the 20th century.
Because the health of the soul is not a data point. The core distinction between salus or health and luxus, luxury or utility, is the principle of essential difficulty.
Essential difficulty.
Our bodies must be exercised, our minds must be challenged, and our characters must be tested. Without productive effort and necessary challenges, we are diminished. We become less human than we could be. Pain and danger, when properly encountered, they shape the whole human story.
Which requires a massive shift in perspective, because it means that a good government shouldn't necessarily give you what you want.
Exactly. We can use the human zoo metaphor to illustrate this clearly. A good zoo exists for the animals. The zookeeper's goal is not to maximize the lion's pleasure. They don't just feed it cheap ground chuck and catnip.
Right.
The zookeeper's goal is to ameliorate the creature's diminution by presenting it with the real challenges of being that animal. For a lion, this means creating conditions that require it to hunt a mechanical zebra or engage in behaviors that tax its physical and mental capacities, even if that's difficult and expensive. The animal's true health requires difficulty, even though its hedonic preference would always be for the bucket of low-effort meat.
So applying that to human governance means prioritizing fulfillment, character development, spiritual robustness over maximum convenience or maximum GDP. And to achieve this in a world where technology has erased so much natural difficulty, the concept of using artificial difficulty is introduced.
Yes, because modern life removes essential challenges. We must sometimes introduce challenges artificially to achieve a higher moral or communal good, and this brings us to a radical case study in what's called absolute public policy, toy control.
Toy control, okay.
Imagine a counter-utilitarian policy that requires all new children's toys sold in the country to be handmade from natural materials by domestic subjects.
A modern economist would have a heart attack.
Immediately. Why? Because the child's established hedonic preference, their immediate desire, is for the cheap, novelty-driven, garish plastic garbage from the Far East. This policy actively reduces the aggregate public satisfaction or utility.
So why do it? Why actively reduce consumer pleasure?
Because the policy is guided by salus populi, the health of the people, not lux populi, this artificial difficulty serves three critical goals. First, it creates hundreds of thousands of human artisanal careers. It demands skilled craftsmanship that fits a wide range of human talent, fostering a sophisticated economy based on quality, maybe modeled after the guild system of apprentice, journeyman, master.
So it restores dignity to labor.
Right. Second, it maximizes product quality and longevity, directly rejecting disposable consumer culture. These toys are meant to last, to be passed down.
And third,
and maybe most critically, it promotes the long-term health of the child. It denies their immediate preference for novelty that overstimulates dopamine circuits, forcing them instead to engage with materials that promote slower, deeper, more imaginative play. It's a frank admission that the government must sometimes deny the immediate desire of the people to ensure their eventual health and humanity.
And the outcome of this societal prioritization of pleasure, of luxus populi over true health, salus populi, and the rejection of productive difficulty, is the rise of the therapeutic state. The cultural critic Philip Reif captured this so well when he noted that the religious man was born to be saved, psychological man is born to be pleased.
And the therapeutic state steps in to completely replace those older ethical and spiritual structures. It replaces traditional religious prohibitions with Freudian self-terms and mandatory transgressions. It promotes a cult where the sacredness of unfettered individual human desire and psychological well-being is the supreme authority. My feelings, my individual sense of fulfillment, that becomes the highest moral good.
But if it's just about individual fulfillment, why is it called a state? Why is it a public entity?
Because this regime, even though it's founded on this idea of radical individual freedom, it acts less like a system that respects private rights and more like a traditional state actively promoting its specific version of the common good, however perverted that good may be. It seeks to enforce this cult publicly. Whether it's through enforcing specific health mandates, intervening in family dynamics, or supporting controversial court decisions, the state seeks to defend this therapeutically understood common good. It wants to help people attain well-being as it defines it. And when opponents challenge these mandates, they often find that arguing for generic freedom is ineffective.
Why?
Because the therapeutic state views its mission as protecting a higher, newer form of virtue, one rooted in this idea of collective psychological fulfillment.
And this philosophical shift is happening at the same time as a sociological collapse. The collapse of traditional social anchors, core family authority, religious cohesion. It leaves the individual completely exposed. Atomized.
Right. They no longer have the buffers of community or church or extended family to mediate their struggles against the state or the economy. You face the institutional maze completely alone.
And that vulnerability is exploited. We see this so acutely in the account of Elena. She was living in a high-rise in Seattle, completely lacking a traditional family or parish network. And when her daughter showed signs of a mild developmental delay, she did what the state told her to do. She turned to the public system for help.
But instead of finding a human community response,
she encountered the sterile, professionalized wellness apparatus of the therapeutic state.
Exactly. She was met with a battery of clinical assessments, mandatory data tracking apps for her daughter's behavior, and these parental coaching sessions that she felt were less about assistance and much more about surveillance and compliance.
Wow.
She described feeling absolutely atomized, as if her essential role as a mother was being outsourced to this cold, predatory institution that saw her family purely as a series of data points to be managed and optimized, not a unit to be loved and supported. The human element was just replaced by clinical quantification.
Her story really illustrates the emotional cost of that trade-off. When the state tries to take over the function of emotional and moral support, all it can really offer is management and metrics. And that creates this deep anxiety. It fosters detachment, not security.
And this administrative and institutional opacity, the sheer unknowability of the rules, the feeling of being managed, it forces rational citizens into a state of perpetual high anxiety. And that leads to a deep sense of systemic betrayal. The psychological stakes become existential. As one senior financial regulator noted, when the foundational rules of the game, like the basic rule of law, suddenly seem at risk or negotiable, it shakes people to their core. The shock is that realization that this is a country built on laws could itself be now suddenly at risk. And that triggers a profound form of grief and political alienation.
That political betrayal, that feeling of being an outsider in your own system. It's embodied in the account of Marcus. He's a small business owner, just trying to understand a local zoning ordinance related to a federal grant. He's trying to play by the rules.
But he was met with overwhelming institutional opacity. Layers of committees, redacted memos, non-answers.
Right.
Marcus's experience defines the crisis of the political exile. A rational, tax-paying citizen who genuinely wants to participate and succeed, but is forced to feel like an enemy in his own home simply because the system is too complex and secretive for engagement. He wakes up daily worrying that some regulation he didn't know about, hidden behind a layer of complexity, could suddenly make his livelihood illegal.
His betrayal isn't directed at a specific politician.
No, it's aimed at the structure's secrecy and its deliberate friction.
And what's so interesting is the striking personal parallel that's drawn to this political alienation. It's compared to the personal trauma experienced by those who grew up in toxic family environments.
It's a direct emotional mirror. Yeah. People who grew up in environments with constant gaslighting and emotional abuse, they express this immense fatigue. They constantly say, "I'm so tired." They're tired from being treated like an emotional release valve or feeling constantly responsible while simultaneously being blamed for everything. For them, detachment or going no contact, choosing internal exile, it becomes a necessary survival mechanism against this ongoing, unpredictable abuse.
So the citizen, pulling back from the opaque state, is adopting the exact same emotional strategy as the adult child cutting off toxic parents.
Exactly. It's survival through withdrawal. In both cases, the shared experiences of exhaustion, of gaslighting, of institutional betrayal, they lead to the same result: alienation from the system and a profound, protective withdrawal of agency and ambition.
The system has succeeded by exhausting the individual.
Until they simply give up and submit to being managed.
So the journey we've taken, from realizing the crippling cost of confusing paperwork, all the way to critiquing the deepest philosophical drivers of modern society, it reveals this profound tension. We are drowning in a weaponized complexity designed specifically to exhaust us into submission. And this exhaustion, it pushes us toward the path of least resistance. Accepting convenience and psychological ease locks us popularly as the highest good.
And we've seen the argument that to restore human dignity and address this crisis, we have to reject the relentless pursuit of maximum pleasure and instead embrace a philosophy salus populi that acknowledges and actively promotes the principle of essential difficulty. This means seeking out challenges, fostering complexity that builds character and community, and accepting productive effort even if it feels jarringly counterintuitive in the age of infinite streaming and algorithmic convenience.
Ultimately, the core problem is not just that we lack the capacity or the knowledge to navigate modern life, but that the architects of our system have successfully conditioned us to desire ease and convenience so thoroughly that we now passively endorse the destruction of the very challenges, bonds, and virtues that make us truly human.